My daughter-in-law left a voicemail while I was still in the recovery room coming out of anesthesia. I did not hear it until 3 days later. By then, my son had already changed the locks on the house I built, drained every account attached to my name, and accepted a cash offer on a property that was never legally his to sell. But none of that is what broke me. What broke me was the voicemail itself. She said, and I remember every single word because I have played it back in my head every night since. Don't worry about rushing back, Robert. We have everything handled. You just focus on resting. 41 missed calls later, they finally understood what that meant. But by then, it was far too late for either of them to do anything about it. Let me tell you where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever trusted someone completely and been destroyed by that trust, this story is for you. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the truth always finds its way to the surface, because this is the story of how it found mine. My name is Robert Callahan. I am 67 years old, and I spent 41 years as a certified public accountant in Memphis, Tennessee. I know what you are thinking. Accountants are not interesting people. We sit in beige offices under fluorescent lighting and argue about depreciation schedules. We do not have dramatic lives. We do not have enemies. We are the most boring creatures God ever put on this earth. But there is one thing you learn after 41 years of following money. Money is never boring. And the people who want it badly enough will do things that would make your hair stand up. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 4 years ago from a long illness that took everything she had. She was the kind of woman who made every room warmer just by being in it. After she died, I did what most men my age do. I rattled around in the big house on Whitmore Lane. I made too much coffee, and I called my son more than he wanted to hear from me. The house had 4 bedrooms and a wraparound porch that Eleanor had planted with hydrangeas every spring. It sat on just under an acre in a part of East Memphis that had become considerably valuable over the years. The last time I had it appraised for insurance purposes, the number came back at a little over $1.4 million. I never thought much about that number. It was just a house. It was where I had lived my life. My son moved back from Dallas 2 years after Eleanor died. He showed up on a Tuesday afternoon with a U-Haul truck, his wife, and a story about a restaurant business they were launching that needed a home base in Memphis. He was 38 years old and had the enthusiastic energy of a man who had never once in his life balanced a checkbook. His wife was polished and pleasant and shook my hand with both of hers when they arrived, the kind of gesture that is supposed to signal warmth but always feels to me like someone testing whether you are real. They moved into the guest wing. I told myself it was good to have the house full again. I told myself Eleanor would have wanted it. The heart attack came on a Thursday morning in February. I was making eggs. 1 minute I was standing at the stove, and the next I was on the kitchen floor looking at the ceiling. The paramedics told me later that my son had found me and called 911 immediately. I thought that meant something. I thought that meant he loved me. The surgery went smoothly according to the doctors. A triple bypass. I woke up in the ICU with tubes in my arms and a cardiologist telling me I was lucky. My son was there when I came around. He squeezed my hand and told me not to worry about anything. He said he and his wife would handle everything while I recovered. He looked me in the eye when he said it. 3 days after the surgery, when I was finally coherent enough to hold my phone, I listened to the voicemail. I remember thinking it was kind. I remember thinking how fortunate I was to have family nearby. I called my son's number. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I told myself he was busy, that managing my affairs and the restaurant launch was a lot to handle. I told myself a lot of things in those 3 days that turned out to be completely wrong. On the 4th day, a nurse named Patricia came in to adjust my medication and asked if I needed anything. I asked her if she could help me log into my online banking portal on the tablet she brought around for patients. She pulled up the chair and handed me the device with a smile. I typed in my credentials. The page loaded, and then I sat very still for a long time. The checking account that I had maintained for 30 years showed a balance of 0. The savings account where I kept my liquid emergency fund, just under $220,000, showed a balance of 0. There was a wire transfer notation dated 2 days after my surgery. Authorized recipient. A business entity called Meridian Hospitality Group, LLC. I knew that name. That was my son and his wife's restaurant company. I put the tablet down on the blanket. I looked out the hospital window at the gray February sky over Memphis. I am a CPA. I have spent 4 decades watching people make catastrophic financial errors. I have seen embezzlement, fraud, and theft at every level from individual families to mid-sized corporations. I always thought I was immune. I always thought my professional knowledge protected me. I was wrong. They had done it while I was on the operating table. They had waited until I was literally unconscious and unable to resist, and they had moved the money. I asked Patricia if she could give me a few minutes alone. When she left, I called the bank's fraud line from memory. I had handled enough estate matters over the years to know that number by heart. A woman named Carla answered. I explained who I was. I explained that unauthorized transfers had been made from my accounts. Carla put me on hold for several minutes, and when she came back, her voice had taken on the specific, careful tone that financial professionals use when delivering information that is going to cause significant distress. Mr. Callahan, she said, the transfers were authorized by a representative presenting a durable financial power of attorney executed in your name. The documentation showed you granting full financial authority to your son. The transfers were processed as legitimate. I thought back. There had been papers. Before a routine colonoscopy 2 years ago, my son had brought a stack of documents to my kitchen table and suggested we finally get the paperwork in order. He used the phrase, estate planning. He said his wife had done research on what documents a man my age should have ready in case of a medical event. I had signed. I had not read every page carefully. I was a CPA who had spent decades handling other people's estate documents and had somehow not extended that same scrutiny to my own. That is the thing about trust. It makes you lazy in exactly the ways that matter most. I thanked Carla and hung up. Then I lay in that hospital bed and I made a decision. I was not going to cry. I was not going to call my son and beg him to explain himself. I was not going to panic. I had been a numbers man my entire career, and the first rule of numbers is that emotion clouds the picture. You have to look at the spreadsheet clearly before you decide what to do. I needed information. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been done before I made a single move. I called the one person in Memphis who I trusted completely. Her name was Diane Mercer, and she had been my attorney for 22 years. She was 63 years old, built like a former college athlete, and had the sharpest legal mind I had ever encountered outside of a courtroom. I told her everything I knew. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, very quietly, "How soon can you receive visitors?" I said, "Tomorrow." She said she would be there at 8 in the morning. She arrived at 8 exactly, carrying a legal pad and a coffee from the hospital cafeteria that she set on my bedside table without asking if I wanted it. She already knew I did. She sat down, crossed her legs, and said, "Before we begin, I need to know one thing. What is your goal here? Do you want your money back, or do you want justice?" I told her both. She nodded once and flipped open her legal pad. By noon, she had confirmed through the county recorder's office that a purchase agreement had been filed for the property at Whitmore Lane. My son, acting as my agent under the power of attorney, had executed a listing agreement 3 days before my heart attack. The surgery had apparently accelerated their timeline. The accepted offer was $1.2 million, $200,000 below appraised value, a cash deal with a quick close scheduled for 10 days out. The buyer was a real estate holding company. She had also confirmed that Meridian Hospitality Group LLC had 2 outstanding loans with a private lending firm called Cascade Capital Partners, totaling $340,000. The loans were in default. The maturity date had passed 6 weeks ago, and Cascade had been sending demand letters. The restaurant had not opened. My son had borrowed money to build something that did not yet exist and had run out of road. I looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I looked at Diane. I said, "I need you to pull the title history on Whitmore Lane." She typed something into her phone and waited. Then she looked up at me with an expression that I had not seen on her face before, something between a smile and a wolf baring its teeth. "Robert," she said. "I think you may have just saved yourself. The property at Whitmore Lane is not titled to Robert Callahan individually. It was transferred into the Callahan Family Holdings LLC in 2021. You are the sole managing member. Your son signed as your agent, but you as an individual had no personal title to transfer." She paused. "The purchase agreement he executed is built on a document that does not reflect the actual ownership structure. The title company is going to find this the moment they do a proper chain of title search before closing. Unless," I said, "they are using a title company that cuts corners on a quick cash close." I spent the next 3 days in that hospital room building something I had not built in a long time. A case. I requested copies of every document from the bank. I asked Diane to subpoena the loan files from Cascade Capital. I requested a full accounting from the title company handling the sale. I was methodical, and I was quiet, and I did not contact my son or his wife at all. I imagine that silence must have felt like permission to them. I imagine they thought the old man was still confused from the anesthesia, resting comfortably, while they finalized the details of their escape. On the morning I was discharged, I did not go home. I went to Diane's office. She had been busy. She had obtained the Cascade Capital files. My son's debt was real, substantial, and more than a month overdue. She had also obtained something else, a text message chain that Cascade's collections manager had forwarded as part of their case documentation. In the chain, my son and his wife discussed the timeline. She had written, "Once the house closes and the wire hits, we pay Cascade off and move the rest to the Cayman account. Then we are done with Memphis." He had replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Done with Memphis. Done with me, in other words. They were not planning to renovate. They were not planning to open a restaurant. They were planning to collect the money, pay off the people who were threatening them, and disappear to wherever a Cayman account points. And I was supposed to be left behind in a recovery facility somewhere, a ward of the state by the time they cleared the area. I sat across from Diane, and I told her I did not want to stop the closing. Not yet. She looked at me carefully, the way she always does when she suspects I am about to do something that requires more paperwork. She said, "Explain." I said, "If we file an emergency injunction today, it becomes a civil dispute. His attorneys argue he was acting in my best interest under the power of attorney. It turns into a family mess that a judge sorts out over 18 months. We get some money back eventually, maybe. But if we let them walk into that closing room and attempt to execute the sale of a property they do not legally own, using forged authority over an LLC they have no rights to, and accept a wire transfer in exchange for a fraudulent deed, then we are not talking about civil court anymore." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are talking about felony fraud, wire fraud, theft by deception over $100,000. A first-degree charge in this state." I said yes. She closed her legal pad. "And the Cascade debt?" I smiled for the first time in 8 days. "What is the face value?" she told me. I pulled out the cashier's check I had drawn that morning from my investment account at a brokerage my son had never known about, a fund I had quietly built over 20 years out of a philosophy that no one person should have access to everything you have. It was one of the first things Eleanor and I had agreed on after we got married. I told Diane to call Cascade and make an offer. 60 cents on the dollar, cash today. Assignment of all rights and collection authority to the Callahan Family Holdings LLC. Cascade took the call at 2 in the afternoon. By 4, they had accepted. By 5, I owned my son's debt. The night before the closing, I stayed at a hotel downtown. I did not sleep much. I lay in the dark and I thought about my son at 3 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a Memphis Redbirds game, eating peanuts and laughing at the mascot. I thought about teaching him to drive in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning. I thought about the way he looked at Eleanor in her last months, quiet and awkward because he never knew what to say to people in pain, and I had always made excuses for him because I understood that about him. Now I understood something else about him too. He was the kind of man who would wait until his father's chest was cut open to empty his bank accounts. He was the kind of man who had a Cayman account and a one-way plan. These two versions of the same person did not cancel each other out. They simply both existed, and I had to hold both of them in my mind at the same time. I got up before sunrise and I shaved carefully. I put on my charcoal Brooks Brothers suit that Eleanor had bought me for my retirement dinner 7 years ago. I tied my tie in a double Windsor the way I always did for important meetings. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. The man looking back was thinner than he had been 2 weeks ago. The surgery had taken something from him physically, and the last 10 days had taken something else. But his eyes were clear and his hands were steady. He looked like what he was. A man who had spent 4 decades finding where the money went. The closing was scheduled at a title company office off Poplar Avenue at 10 in the morning. Diane was meeting me in the parking lot at 9:45. She had already briefed 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit who would be present in the building. I arrived at 9:40. Diane was already there, her briefcase tucked under her arm, her expression unreadable in the professional way that good attorneys cultivate over many years. We waited outside in the February cold for a few minutes. She showed me the buyer's representative's name on the paperwork, a man named Garrett from the holding company, who had conducted no physical inspection of the property and had communicated entirely through email. He would be in that room with a bank wire authorization. Then she showed me something else. A photo from a surveillance camera she had obtained from the neighbors on Whitmore Lane. My son and his wife loading boxes into a rented truck the previous evening. They had been emptying the house of anything valuable. Eleanor's antique secretary desk was visible in the truck bed. So were several paintings we had collected over the years. They were not just selling the house. They were liquidating everything inside it as well, and they had not asked my permission for any of it. I took a slow breath. I tucked my briefcase under my arm. I said, "Let's go in." The conference room on the second floor was bright with morning light. Garrett, the buyer's representative, was a compact man in his 40s who had the practiced neutrality of someone paid to close deals without asking questions. He looked up when I entered and immediately looked uncertain, the way people do when the scene does not match what they were told to expect. Sitting at the table across from him were my son and his wife. She saw me first. Her coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Then my son turned and went the color of old paper. "Dad," he said, standing partially. You are out already. We thought they were keeping you another week," the doctors said. He stopped talking because he could see Diane behind me, and he could see the briefcase. And he was a smarter man than he pretended to be in that moment. His wife recovered faster. She always did. She smiled the smile that I had always found unsettling in a way I could never articulate to Eleanor. "Dad," she said, "we are so glad you are feeling better. We were just finalizing things here so you do not have to worry about any of it. You can go back and rest, and we will bring you a full accounting once everything is done." It was an impressive performance. She managed to sound both relieved and in control simultaneously. She also reached across the table and put her hand on the closing documents, a gesture so subtle that Garrett probably missed it entirely. I did not. I walked to the head of the table. I set my briefcase down. I looked at Garrett. I introduced myself by name and explained that I was the sole managing member of Callahan Family Holdings LLC, the entity that held legal title to the property under discussion. I watched his face change. I watched him look down at his documents and back up at me. My son tried once. He said, "Dad, you signed the power of attorney. I am handling your affairs. You should not even be here right now. You just had surgery. You need to rest. I have everything under control." I let him finish. Then I said, very calmly, "The power of attorney you are relying on grants you authority over my personal assets and personal financial decisions. It does not grant you any authority whatsoever over the LLC, of which I am the sole managing member. You have no legal standing in this transaction." He opened his mouth. I said, "I am not finished." Diane placed the LLC operating agreement on the table. She placed the title history showing the 2021 transfer. She placed the original warranty deed. She placed the executed purchase agreement my son had signed, indicating he was acting as my personal agent and not as any authorized representative of the LLC. She laid each document down with the patience of someone who had practiced this moment. She explained to Garrett in terms that even a non-attorney could follow, that the document his company had relied upon to proceed with this transaction contained a fundamental defect that rendered the entire sale void as a matter of law. She then explained what that meant for the title company, for the holding company, and for the individual who had represented himself as having authority he did not possess. Garrett picked up his phone. He made a brief call. When he set the phone down, he looked at my son and said, "We are withdrawing from this transaction pending a full title review." He picked up his wire authorization document, folded it, and put it in his inside jacket pocket. He looked at me and said he was sorry for the confusion. He looked at my son with a different expression entirely. Then he left. The room was very quiet. His wife was staring at the table. My son was staring at the wall to my left. I reached into my briefcase, and I removed the Cascade Capital Assignment Agreement. I set it in front of him. He looked down at it. He went even paler. "I recognize the name," he said quietly. "Cascade." His wife's head came up sharply. "What is that?" She looked from him to the document to me. "That is the loan you have been hiding from me?" He did not answer her. I said, "Cascade assigned the debt to the Callahan Family Holdings LLC 2 days ago, which means you no longer owe $340,000 to a private lending firm. You owe it to me. And unlike Cascade, I am not going to send you a collection notice. I have already instructed Diane to file for immediate judgment in civil court under the terms of the promissory note, which includes an acceleration clause that makes the full balance due now." His wife said his name once, sharp and accusatory. He still did not look at her. "I also want you to know," I said, "that Diane has briefed the Financial Crimes Unit on the wire transfers from my personal accounts following my surgery. The detectives are in this building. When we are finished here, they are going to come through that door. The charge is theft by deception, over $200,000, which in Tennessee is a Class B felony." I looked at him steadily. "I am the victim, and I am prepared to testify." His wife stood up. She said this was a misunderstanding, that they were managing my assets in my interest, that any reasonable reading of the power of attorney would support that interpretation. Her voice had the brittle quality of someone who knows the argument is failing but keeps making it anyway because stopping feels like admitting everything. I watched her, and I felt nothing that I had expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a kind of vast, clean clarity. My son put his face in his hands, not crying, just done. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about all the versions of him I had known across 38 years. Then I thought about the text message. "Done with Memphis," I said. "I spent my entire career following money trails, son. 41 years tracking where every dollar went and why. I did it for clients. I did it for companies. I did it for people who were too trusting, or too busy, or too scared to do it themselves." I paused. Turns out, I should have done it for myself a little sooner. I nodded to Diane. She opened the conference room door. The 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit stepped inside. What happened after that moved the way legal processes always move, which is to say, slowly and in one direction. The DA reviewed the evidence, the wire transfers, the fraudulent POA application, the forged LLC representation in the purchase agreement, the text message chain from Cascade's files, and the voicemail, that soft and terrible voicemail about not rushing back. He did not offer a plea deal. He said publicly that financial elder abuse was a priority for his office, and that this case was exactly the kind that needed to be prosecuted fully. His wife took the case to trial. She had a good attorney who argued that she had acted in good faith under a reasonable interpretation of broad financial authority. The jury disagreed. She was convicted on 2 counts of theft by deception and 1 count of wire fraud. She was sentenced to 4 years in the Tennessee Department of Correction. My son cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced charge. He pled to a single count of financial exploitation of an elderly person. He received 2 years of supervised probation, 160 hours of community service, and a civil judgment for the full amount of the transferred funds, plus interest and legal fees. The money came back. Not all of it and not quickly, but enough. The LLC's legal claim against the fraudulent transfer was upheld, and the funds were ordered returned from the Meridian Hospitality account, where they had been sitting, unspent, because the restaurant never opened and never would. The furniture and paintings my son had loaded into that truck were inventoried and returned. Eleanor's secretary desk came back with a scratch on the left side panel that had not been there before. I had it repaired by a furniture restorer on Cooper Street who did beautiful work and charged me $120. It sits now in the same corner of the study where it has always sat. I did not sell the house on Whitmore Lane. I know I probably should have. There were people who told me the memories made it unreasonable to stay, that a man my age does not need 4 bedrooms and an acre of hydrangeas to maintain a loan. But I rebuilt that porch railing myself 17 years ago with my own hands. I know where every board came from. Eleanor planted those hydrangeas the year our son started kindergarten. The house is a document of my life, and I am not ready to file it away yet. I hired a property management assistant, a young woman named Josephine, who comes 3 days a week and has opinions about everything from the gutters to the kitchen tile grout that I find more entertaining than I expected. The house feels different now. Quieter in the right way instead of the wrong way. About 3 months after the sentencing, a letter arrived from a correctional facility in West Tennessee. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope. I did not open it for 4 days. I left it on the kitchen counter and looked at it every morning while I made coffee. On the 5th day, I sat down at the table and opened it. It was 2 pages, handwritten on lined notebook paper. The first paragraph said he was sorry. The second paragraph explained how his wife had talked him into it, how the debt pressure had made him feel like he had no options, how he had told himself it was only temporary, that he was going to pay everything back once the restaurant succeeded, that he never meant for it to go as far as it did. The third paragraph asked if I could put money on his commissary account. The fourth paragraph asked if I was doing all right health-wise. The fifth paragraph said he missed me. I read it twice. I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope in the drawer of Eleanor's secretary desk, where I keep things I am not ready to decide about yet. It is still there. What I did instead was call Diane and ask her to help me establish the Eleanor Callahan Financial Literacy Foundation. We launched it that fall, in partnership with 3 community colleges in the Memphis metro area. The program teaches adults over 50 how to read the documents they sign, how to understand power of attorney language, how to protect assets from financial exploitation, how to ask the questions that I did not ask. We saw 62 participants in the first semester. Diane runs the board. Josephine does the scheduling. I teach the first module myself every Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, which is the same hour I used to sit down at my desk at the firm every day for 4 decades. Old habits are not always bad ones. I am 67 years old. My heart is repaired, and my cardiologist told me at my last checkup that my numbers look better than they did before the surgery, which he attributed to medication, but which I privately attribute to having considerably less stress in my life. I drink good coffee in the mornings on the porch that I rebuilt with my own hands. I watch the hydrangeas come back every spring, reliable and entirely indifferent to everything that has happened around them. My phone sits on the porch table next to my coffee. There are 41 missed calls on it from a correctional facility number. I have not deleted them. I have not answered them either. I keep them there, the way I keep the letter in the drawer, as a record, as a number in a ledger that I have not yet decided how to close. Some accounts take longer than others to settle, but every ledger, eventually, balances. If this story made you feel something, hit the like button and subscribe to Crimson Revenge, so you never miss a story about what happens when people mistake patience for weakness. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If you were sitting on that porch with 41 missed calls, would you answer? Drop your answer below. I read every one.